Hey, family, God bless you. This is Bishop John Selders, and I'm so glad to be here with you tonight. After taking a few weeks off, we are back live. We are back live doing that thing that we do. Listen, I get the privilege and the joy to be in conversations. I hope you consider them relevant. At least I do, and others have suggested that they are. And I get to talk to the people that I think are interesting, people that I sometimes know, and in this case, somebody that I know pretty well, and in fact, somebody I like. So all of that is all wrapped up in there together, and then I get to chop it up, with folk that I like, who are actually bright, smart, brilliant, passionate, talented, sometimes slow, but mean good. They mean good for the world, right? and tonight is no exception. Tonight, in fact, I'm going to talk with one of our brothers who I've known for a pretty long time. It comes to me that we've known each other for about 20 years coming on in here or so, and have journeyed with each other, have been a part of each other's lives, both our personal lives and our public ministry together. Listen, our brother is no stranger to controversy, and no stranger to getting locked up every now and then for the cause. And I have enjoyed and witnessed him from up close and from a distance do the work of ministry in the way that has impacted hundreds and hundreds of people's lives. First in Philadelphia, and then across the state of Pennsylvania, and then got him one of them big old DC national jobs, got him a national work, and has been out there on the case for a good long time. And let me bring to this platform and welcome for the first time, but not the last time, my brother Bishop Dwayne David Royster. Don't nobody know that middle name. It's only a few of us that know that middle name. I call you by your government name right there.
You sure enough gave all the government information out. Gave all the government information out. That's all right.
Greet the people, brother.
Greetings. Hello, everybody. And I'm so excited to be here with my friend, my brother, actually one of the co-consecrators when I became a bishop in the Lord's Church, Bishop John Selders. And I'm so excited about the work that he's been doing in Connecticut for a very long time. And you're right, we've known each other 20 years. It was first when I first came to the United Church of Christ that we met and spent some time together, and traveled thick for a while until our ministries kind of took us in different places. But I am really grateful that to be able to be here with you today. I know that I was consecrated in 2007. So that's how long, and we've known each other years before that. We had the real fortunate opportunity. You brought Bishop Carlton Pearson to Philadelphia, and he spoke at my church and spoke at the Harold O. Davis Memorial Baptist Church, and the things that we did together. So real exciting times, and love your ministry and the work that you've been doing. In many ways, I have been tracking you and following you, and sometimes like using you as inspiration even for the work that I'm doing right now, in not just when I was in Pennsylvania, but even now nationally and internationally. So I appreciate you. Love you, Bishop. Thank you for your leadership and everything that you're doing. And I spent some time living in Connecticut. So I am deeply appreciative. I used to live in Hamden, Connecticut. So appreciative of the work that you're doing there, and praying for your strength as you continue to help lead and prophesy in this particularly difficult moment in human history. So thank you. And thank you, everybody who's listening. I appreciate being a part of the conversation tonight.
Yes, sir. Listen, we date back, and thank you for your kind words. I'll send the offering in I'll cash out.
And to Lady Pamela too. Hello. I got to make sure I get Lady Selders in there. I can't leave her out in the family.
Absolutely. Likewise. To our sister and beloved sister, your better half as well. Listen, we go back some years, and certainly knew we were kindred spirits. And I too have stalked you when you haven't been in regular conversation.
Sure.
But just like family do, you just pick up where you left off, right? And you've been a pastor. Certainly, you've been out here in these streets. You've been doing justice work in the name of God, and in the name of love, and in the spirit, and in the legacy of people like our beloved Dr. Martin Luther the King, and so many others. I started naming folk, and then we'll just be in that naming thing, because he's just one of hundreds of folk who have blessed our lives in their witness and their public witness. And you too are bearing witness. You have brought to the world, changed the damn world. We'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about that. But can we go back a little bit? A couple of things I'd love to do for us tonight. One, I'd like to talk about your journey into this walk of faith, in your particular brand. One. Two, I'd like to also link that to what I believe is, and I'll say a little bit. We've been doing and curating conversations with the role of the prophet in the centerpiece, but using that as the center, getting to that space using conjunctural analysis. That is to say, there's a way in which we come to a moment, right? We come to, to understand a particular moment in time, all right? And then there's some things we need to we know we're in that moment because some stuff is happening, right?
Yeah.
And then there might be an opportunity for us to posit that we may be not just in a change moment or in a particular moment, but we might be moving from one particular moment into another particular moment. Now, there's a bunch of academic highfalutin language that's attached to that, which we can go into, and you and I both are we're adept in accessing some of that language. But Vincent and High, my people come from Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, right? From down south. They would just say, "Child, can't you tell something going on in the spirit?" And then they would start to prophetically talk about what their moments are. And I can hear them old folk that I grew up around in them storefront churches of my youth, them storefront Pentecostal sanctification and holiness churches. And they would say, "God doing something. There's a new thing." And then they would start calling what that new thing is, not knowing that that new thing was stirring and beginning right in our midst. And so they would reference that. So I want to do that. I want to spend some time talking about that. But I want to, before we get deep in, let's talk about your journey. You were like most of us, knucklehead coming through. I done talked to your mama and them, so I know a little bit about your knuckleheadness, right? Like many of us, I can claim I had a little knuckleheadness of my own if you talk to the right folk. And then went to college. Didn't do all the right things. You had some troubles. And then that led you to some other spaces and places, right, and ultimately led you to the call. So could you talk a little bit about that, and then link that to what it is that you're now doing, and starting with what happened with Living Water and then moving forward?
Sure. So I'm a kid from Philly, right? I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I'll go back that far so I can kind of lay a foundation a little bit. And my parents really broke the block that we lived on in East Mount Airy. As a matter of fact, they bought the house from a Jewish doctor, and it was a neighborhood that was changing over, beginning the process of changing over. It just so happened on our side of the street, in the block that we lived on, my parents were the first Black family to buy in that area. I mean, it was a twin house. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it was a twin house. I'm grateful for the experience of growing up there. When my as you know, we started to get a little bit of age. My mother actually became a organizer and actually the head of an organization called East Mount Airy Neighbors. And she was actually a community organizer back in the 70s. So I'm giving away my age a little bit. And I think from that age, watching my mom really, working in community, working to try to build a multiracial solidarity movement. The goal of the organization was to try to keep the neighborhood from totally converting to any one community, but try to create a community that the rest of the world could look at and say, this is how we build multiracial democracy at a local level. And so she did that for several years during the 1970s, and then eventually left, went back to school, and finished her degree as my sister, brother, and I started to get older. But the bug bit me at that point. But then on the flip side of that, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was a member of Zion Baptist Church in Philly when the Reverend Dr. Leon Sullivan was the pastor. And, they talk about people getting drugged to church. Well, that was literally my sister, brother, and I. My parents loved the Lord and hated the church, thought it was a hypocritical institution. And they were like, when you all turn 21, you can figure out whatever it is you want to do. My grandmother decided that she was going to take it upon herself to take my sister, brother, and I to church with her on a regular basis. And so we used to go down to Zion Baptist in Philadelphia. Leon Sullivan, very critical civil rights leader, referred to as the Lion of Zion, founder of Opportunities Industrialization Center, began the African American Summit, Economic Summit, was really about Black empowerment in the 70s and 80s, and really helped to start their first Black mall in America, which was done with pennies and dimes and nickels from Black churches across Philadelphia. They bought a strip mall in Philly called Progress Plaza that exists to this day. Back in the 70s. As a matter of fact, my grandmother had a share in that in the Progress Plaza, and my father owns that share now to this day. And so there was a lot of what I saw about all this. And, I got involved in a level of activism and politics at a very young age, from knocking on doors at 7, 8 years old for politicians, delivering stuff in mailboxes, and, making phone calls and doing all kinds of stuff. And then my mother didn't really let us get away with not doing that, because when she had a meeting, she took my sister, brother, and I with us. But to keep us quiet, she would take out the stamps and the newsletters that had to be mailed, because there was no email, there was no fax machine, it wasn't, you did everything by mail, snail mail. And we would sit there and stuff hundreds of envelopes, thousands of envelopes, while she was in her meetings, and that kept our mouths and our hands occupied during that time frame. And so we sat there, and our home became a place where mayors and council people and state representatives and state senators and congressional leaders would show up, because we were hosting things at the house. So I had a chance at a very young age to kind of see what community organizing could look like on one hand. And then on the other hand, from my grandmother's experience, I had a chance to see what it looked like to have Black power, and Black power that's rooted in Black faith. And so, high school, I kind of went and did my thing, went out there for a minute. I eventually went to Boston College. I did 2 years at BC. And that's actually where I answered my call to ministry. But at the same time, I was having a really good time and did not finish at BC at that time. It took me several years later to finish my undergraduate degree, eventually at the Center for Urban Theological Studies, then to Eastern Baptist Seminary, Lutheran Seminary, where I got my master's, and then started a doctorate at Lancaster Theological that I never wound up finishing. But I mean, I want to say this, that for me, for a lot of people going into ministry, it was very much about, like, they want to go because they want to do preach and teach and do weddings and, get people saved and, all those things. The models I had for ministry were Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer, people that lived there, Bayard Rustin, right, who lived their faith in a very different way, right? They lived their faith in creating change, systemic change, structural change in the world. And so when I answered my call to ministry when I was a sophomore at Boston College, it was, I think I always knew I was going to pastor at some point, and I wound up doing that for 33 years before I left to kind of step fully into prophetic ministry. But for me, ministry was about changing the world, and not just changing the world, but changing the damn world, because too many people are already waking up every morning feeling like they're living in hell. So the world feels like it's damned already. So how are we about changing that and transforming that? And I think that that's really what Jesus did, was a radical transformation of trying to change the conditions of society, the way that people were viewed in society, especially the least, the last, the lost, the disinherited, the dispossessed, and the disenfranchised. And so for me, that's what I felt my call to ministry was. So while I did pastor for several years, and I started out at the United Methodist Church at Camp Memorial United Methodist Church, went to the Mennonite Church, Way Life Ministries, in the Mennonite tradition. I was ordained as a Mennonite. I left that, went on staff at Howard O. Davis Church, started Living Water Church from that as a progressive, non-denominational church that we eventually brought into the United Church of Christ, eventually moving down to Washington, D.C., and then taking on Faith United Church of Christ in the Washington, D.C. area before just last September, stepping out of pastoral ministry. And after 30 some odd years saying, okay, I've done that part. I now need to step heavily into this prophetic space so that we can really be about full attention about what it means to be a prophet in this particular moment in human history. And so that's really been a lot of the work and where I've come from in the journey.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about this move from the pastoral ministry. Now let's be clear. You were doing prophetic work even as pastor, right? So so this is just kind of an extension, in at least in my mind, and you can correct me if not. But talk a little bit about what you began to see as pastor that needed, not just the regular smegular, right? It needed something else. What were those posts? Because again, for me, it's, Antonio Gramsci would say there's a prevision, if you will, a way in which to understand that neither forethought nor what he would say prediction could actually say, but what you saw was something that was akin to a methodology or a way of thinking or a way of viewing what was going on that then demanded action, right? And not just action in some by and by, but action right now for change. Talk a little bit about that got started in your local church that then called you beyond and with the local church.
Yeah, so I mean, we need to go back to Living Water. So I started and founded and started and pastored Living Water United Church of Christ in Philadelphia for 14 years, which was intentionally started as a progressive African-American non-denominational church. And with the intention that it was going to be a prophetic space, right? This was going to be a place. And when I want to be clear about prophetic, right? Because I think, especially for those that have been in the church and in the Black church, right? Prophetic means, certain prophets show up and they do $1,000 lines and $100 lines and everybody getting the word and, all that stuff. I'm talking about really stepping into the mantle of the Old Testament prophet, right? And the mantle of Jesus and Paul and others that were really, the prophetic, which is speaking truth to power, but also speaking truth to the people at the same time, right? And so that was really part of Living Water's, foundation. So we were open and affirming from our very beginning, right? The founding of our church, right? We had very, I don't want to say liberal because it wasn't really liberal, right? We thought we were being faithful, right? In terms of our identification of welcoming people in and being an inclusive space, regardless of economic level, regardless of color, regardless of race. At one point, the church was half Hispanic, half Latin, half African-American. It was a space. I mean, it started as a small space and we eventually bought a Lutheran church and moved into a neighborhood that was mixed Black and Latin as well, with a lot of immigrant folk that came and African folk that came, the congregation, African immigrants that became a part of our community. But from that space, we started doing organizing work and really which was about like more systemic change. And we were trying to work with an organization called Power, which eventually changed its name to Power Interfaith, which was the faith-based organizing movement in Philly that I was originally affiliated with, helping to get off the ground and eventually became the first executive director of. But we really saw that the work of justice was an extension of our ministry as a congregation. And that was really one of our main ministries. Like, how are we changing the world around us so that people don't wake up feeling like they're living in hell every day? And I mean, I think that there's a lot of ways that churches try to do that. It's like some try to do it through like mission, or, works, right? They try to do, direct service kind of things, food programs, pantries, clothing things. We did all that. And that was good, but that doesn't change the reason why folk are poor or hungry or need clothing or, need visiting in prison in the first place, right? You got to go upstream and find out what's causing the folk to come down. I think they always tell a story about the babies coming down the river. Somebody sees a baby coming down the river, and the first thing they do is jump in the water to get that baby out. And they're like, oh, we did something. But then there's another baby coming down the river and another baby, and they keep going, and eventually they can't catch them all. And at some point, somebody says, we got to go upstream to find out why all the babies are coming into the river. And one of the challenges that we were facing was that Pennsylvania, and in particular Philadelphia was the poorest big city in America. It's 1.6 million people. And at the time, there were about 30% of people that were living in poverty. Actually, if you just got above the poverty line, that was 45% of the population of the city. So almost 800,000 people that were, and let me just be honest with you, if you're just above the poverty line, you're still in poverty. And so, because you just got enough money that you can't get any, benefits or anything, and you're not getting any tax breaks. And so honestly, you wind up with very, very little to be able to live on. And so we began to say, well, how do we raise the wage? How do we take a look at helping to impact in a way the systems and the structures so that people economically could be doing better? And so we partnered with, as Power was a part of another 40 congregations across the city that were Christian, Jewish, Muslim, ethical, humanist, Unitarian, Universalist, Quaker. We began to come together and work on campaigns that were, first campaign was around the Philadelphia airport, around the jobs that were being created with the expansion down there. We did work around education funding and about the inequity of funding in state. But we saw that as a part of our ongoing ministry and mission, right? I mean, when you read the New Testament, and in particular the Gospels, half the time that Jesus is talking, he's talking about money, right? And he's talking about equity, and he's talking about treating people with dignity and respect. And the reality was that $7.25 an hour in Philadelphia, there's not dignity and respect in that. We want to be able to say there's dignity in all work, but there's not dignity in all wages. And so we needed to be able to address that and say that. When we wanted to take a look at the education system, and, there's a real command, particularly for fathers, right, to raise their children up so that they learn and grow and don't set them on edge and do things like that. But yet the quote unquote fathers of our state were doing economic discrimination by making it so that majority white districts were getting $1,400 to $2,000 more per year, $1,400 to $2,000 a year more in education funding for their districts than Black and brown districts were. And so, like, we're looking and saying, well, and then blaming folk for violence, blaming folk for not learning, but you've undercut the Philadelphia school district by $500 million a year for decades. And you can't make up all of that because some people have graduated and gone on at this point. So how do we create equity in those spaces? And then dealing with climate issues, like looking at some of the worst climate results, environmental results are in Black and brown neighborhoods in the city of Philadelphia. And it's intentionally done that way. And so then we have to live into that, right? Because God calls us to be stewards. I know a lot of people go to Genesis and, they interpret, Genesis and saying God gave them dominion. Actually, it says, no, God gave them stewardship. And when you're a steward, it's different than having dominion, because dominion, you can do whatever you want with it. Steward means you have an accounting for what you did. In much the same way that Jesus told the story about the talents, we have the same responsibility for the earth itself. And we're killing it, and we're doing everything we possibly can to kill it right now. And so we have all those things that we have to work with. So I think, that's part of ministry for me. And I love a lot of our colleagues that have very good, powerful, prophetic messages that they preach on Sunday. But if all we're doing is preaching the message and we're not moving people into action, we haven't done very much. And so that is, that's actually one of my critiques of the Black church right now. Like, in many ways, I'm like, what are we doing, right? We preach these great, powerful messages, but how are we doing system change work? How are we doing the kind of substantive work that's actually going to change structures? Like, we can get up in our pulpits and complain about the decision of the Supreme Court, but there was a time when we could have been moving not only our congregations into voting, but we should have been moving our congregations into Washington, D.C. and other places, and speaking to our senators and telling them not to allow the certain Supreme Court justices to get passed into office, right? And so, but we're not thinking like that, right? Because we want to be holy and we want to tell them about Jesus and the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, y'all, the Jesus that some of those Supreme Court justices look at is not the same Jesus you look at. It is not, they're not making decisions that are lining up with whom we see as God's people, which is all of us. And so how are we, so for us at Living Water, at us for Power, it's very much about how is our faith coming alive so that everybody can flourish and thrive, especially those that have been disregarded the deepest in this community: Black folk, brown folk, immigrants, Muslims, others that have been disregarded on a regular basis.
So appreciate it. I watched it as it became a thing. Living Water was just a couple of people and a couple of families, and you was trying to raise an offering just to try to get in the building to patch a hole in the leak that was in the roof of that first building. I remember that
Yep.
building.
Yep.
To what Living Waters became before you stepped away and went to DC, and then took an old established church and moved it to its next. I watched it happen. You have been certainly not a wallflower. You have been out there out loud about what it means to take on what I would call the prophetic voice, right? That prophecy is not just, as you named, what happens within the context of four walls to believers, right? In a kind of classic, Christian sense. I find it very interesting when you use these kind of religious terms, that it gets couched in Christian language, when in fact, prophecies, and prophets have been named across religious traditions, right? So, they started with Jews, in fact, and I would say before Jews, there were other prophets that were in spaces and places across the world. And be that as it may, what it literally means, at least in part to me, is speaking truth to what is perceived as power and powerful, the systems that are in place that dominate people, that in fact exploit people. Can we say empire? Speaking truth to empire, and that we have a role, and quite frankly, our spiritual witness says that we not only take a look at it, but we have a responsibility to do something about it. It is not just to feed the hungry and go to the prisons and all that. That's right. Jesus said that's what you do. When you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. That should be the baseline, right? That's the start of the gospel, if you ask me. But more to the point, that it is our responsibility to also take a look at what's causing it. I love the metaphor of going upstream. See what, I can teach, I can give you some fish because I know how to fish, but one, I want to teach you to fish, but two, let's talk about how much the water is jacked up that we can't get enough fish to feed, everybody, so there are all those kinds of things that you certainly have been engaged and involved in that. I want to, one of the things that you named that I want to just highlight for a moment, that I've really watched and marveled, that you and your work with both Power, and your work with the national organizing efforts you've been a part of now, Faith in Action, that it's not, you've not necessarily leaned totally on what I would call putting our eggs in the whole electoral politics basket, that and in a national context, that there's work to be done in our local, in our cities, in our towns. There's work to be done in our states, and there's systems, not just political, but political, but not just political, that have to do with that. Could you talk a little bit about that, and then link that to what this latest thing? You know anything about this Project 2025? You know anything about that?
Just a little bit about it. So, I mean, I think there are a couple of things. I mean, we do some electoral politics work, but let me just be clear. So I'm a former politician, right? I was a councilman in Norristown, Pennsylvania. I spent about a year and a half on Norristown Council before I resigned because it was actually interfering with the work I was doing. And I felt like I was more powerful in the streets and with our people than being on the political side. And I stand by that even to this day, in terms of the work that we have to do. But I also am very clear, like, I'm not beholden to any political party. I'm beholden to the interests of the people, right? Because I think, we have a saying, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. The only thing that we have is a permanent interest, and that's of the people. And it's God's people in particular that I'm looking at, that we're actually, because we are a congregational-based organizing movement. So it's the people sitting in the pews, not even just the preachers, right? Because a lot of places just want to deal with the preachers. We want the people in the pews to get engaged with us in the work. And so I think it's very important for us to understand electoral politics is one piece, but that there's also actually structural work on policies, laws, the way constitutions and different governing documents are written and used that actually have a deep impact on what happens in our communities. And it's not just enough for us to get up and say, yeah, we need to get rid of that. We actually have to have a strategy. We have to have a plan. We actually need to put people in motion, right? We need to leverage our power to get what we want in our communities. And so that's a lot of the work. Now, electoral side, yes, there's places, but we're political, but we're nonpartisan. And part of that has to do with the fact that I want to be able to say what I need to say regardless of your political party. It's actually funny. I belong to a certain political party, but not all of the politicians in my state in Pennsylvania actually want to have conversation with me because they really don't want to hear what I have to say. Because just because and I think, let me just say a little bit more about that, right? Sometimes we are so in bed with one political party that we no longer get to be a prophet. We wind up being a chaplain. And the political parties and the structures that they exist in right now do not exist for you and I to flourish. They exist for the perpetuation of their own selves and their own power. And so, one of the things Dr. Troy Jackson and I some years ago did a training in California with a group of religious leaders that were part of the network that we belonged to at the time. And we titled the workshop, "Are you a chaplain of the empire or a prophet of the resistance?" And the resistance is actually sometimes resisting both political parties and challenging both political parties or any political party for that matter. There's more than two parties, although we don't act like it in this country. There really are. But how are we challenging those parties to do what they have to do? Now, there are times and places when we align with one over the other based on, we have a C4 organization that does that. So we just be clear, right? This is C3 work, C4 work. But the reality is that most of the time we're pushing all the politicians to line up with the vision of the people and not to line up with their own vision of their political contributors, not the little ones, because they don't ever pay attention to the little ones, the big contributors that are writing big checks to their political action committees.
So we got this Project 25.
Project 2025, Lord have mercy.
Yeah. So it's got these 4 pillars, right? These 4 pillars. It wants to, the Project 25 has been put together, and the Heritage Foundation is at the helm of it.
But there's 100 organizations involved.
Yeah, right. It's a bunch of
organizations. Yes,
that's right. Given by one single donor who gave a whole lot of money to all those organizations.
Absolutely.
To come together to say, hey, right, we want you to pull the plan together that then will be used by one of the administrations should they win the election, right? And implement what they call a policy guidebook, right? With these four pillars. I want to mention these four pillars because I think it's very interesting. To restore the family as the centerpiece of American life. When was it not? But anyway, to dismantle the administrative state by creating a administrator. Anyway, to defend the nation's sovereignty and borders. And then this last one tickles me. To secure God's given individual rights to live freely. Now that sound flowery if you don't look past the rhetoric to find the meaning. So talk a little bit about your encounter to Project 25.
Yeah, Project 2025, I mean, basically it's the Heritage Foundation and about 100 groups from around the country. They're coming together. And it's basically their plan over the course of about the first 18 months of a potential Republican administration to dismantle the federal government. It's really libertarian in its orientation. But the reality is that it's also a plan, I think, in particular for white men to be able to regain control of the country. And as I heard our brother and friend, Bishop Talbot Swan said, well, he said, if they put this in place, I guess some of us are going to be back in chains again, not necessarily in prison, but on the plantation. So that's what some of that liberty that they want for. It's not intended for you and I, right? It's not intended to benefit us. Although there are some of us that wrote some of the chapters of that. But the reality is it's deeply about oligarchs and creating a plutocracy. It's not, even though they're using the faith as a vehicle to do this, the Christian faith that they're talking about doesn't exist in the Bible. So, let me just say, there is a Christian faith. There's a faith that it talked about in the Bible, but it's usually the one Jesus is fighting against. So, because Jesus was not in bed with empire, right? He did not line up with empire. And basically what these folk are trying to do is create an empire and create an empirical system that's authoritarian and controlled by a few folk. And so honestly, while they're saying that this is going to be a Christian thing, it actually has nothing to do with Jesus Christ, nothing whatsoever.
Ooh. So we got Project 2025.
Yeah.
With this plan that's embedded. And so one of the things, as we've been curating these conversations, we've had some conversation with some folk who rocked with our beloved now Saint Jim Lawson, the Reverend Dr. Jim Lawson, and the Highlander Center. We've had conversation with other faith leaders, a sister beloved of ours, who's from the DC area, and now is living in Central America, but spends a whole lot of time still here in the United States. And we've had some conversations with some other folk to kind of mine out. So these last few moments that we had together for tonight, we're going to have some more, because I think what you have to say and the work that you are doing with Faith in Action, we want to make sure gets a hearing and a voice, at least on our platforms. Here's what I want to spend some time with. There is this role of the prophet as we've been taught it, and then as you and I and others, both our contemporaries and folk who have come before us have tried to live out in their times. I believe there is something that's at work in us, both the will and to do of what I would call God's good pleasure, and keep pushing when I get frustrated and aggravated and want to go sit in the corner and y'all go figure it out because I'm tired, right? Because that comes, and yet I can't quite give up the fact that there must be, and God, okay, it's just like fire. Jeremiah said, shut up in my bones. Shut up. I can't shut up. I can't keep quiet. That keeps pushing. So we have a role and a responsibility both to say and to lead and to act. Sometimes that act is a single solitary public act. And you've done like I have at times, said, listen, I'm on this wall, I'm not gonna come down, y'all got to come get me. I done stood in the gap, and listen, I got arrested one time just for singing in my state capitol. I was singing. They let me pray. All right. But as soon as we started singing, they said, okay, Bishop, we got to arrest you. In the Connecticut state capitol, in a state capitol of this country, a preacher gets arrested for singing. And you know what they charged me with? They charged me with disrupting the flow of the General Assembly. That's what they charged me. That's what they charged me. So I want to hear from you. What is our role here? What's God and your faith? What can't let you go to sleep at night? What wakes you up in the morning in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of this right now is, I feel like the church is a sleeping giant. And one of the things some years ago, when the Pew report came out in 2015 about the state of the church in America, right? And it began to talk about the spiritual nuns, right? People who are spiritual but not affiliated. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the church was getting more and more irrelevant in the lives of everyday people, right? I mean, we have great mega churches that, tell people how they're going to live their lives and how to manifest money and all this other stuff, right? But the circumstance, that's a select few that get the benefit from that. And it's almost like, well, if you're here and you're doing well, you're good and you're in the will of God, and to hell with everybody else. And so the reality is, though, is that we're all God's people, and God wants all of us to flourish and thrive. And if everybody around you is not flourishing and thriving, then the church has a responsibility to call out into the world, to speak truth into power, to speak truth to the systems, or as you said, speak truth to the empire, or as I would say, be a prophet of the resistance and say, we're not going to tolerate this. We're not taking this. And everybody doesn't have to do what I did, right? So, I started locally, then went to state, then national, international. Faith in Action is now international in its orientation. So we're doing work in 12 countries outside the U.S. in addition to our work in the United States. But the reality is that if we are not stepping up and holding people in the public square accountable, then we are complicit in the oppression of the people that are around us. So, like one of the things I get upset about is, like, I hear people talk about, well, we need to get these kids off drugs. Why are they on drugs? Why is it that drugs flow freely in our communities, but don't flow freely into other communities, right? But we buy the lie, the narrative, the story. And so how are we as preachers, as religious leaders, telling a different story about what's going on in the world around us? Why is it that we're eating up what's coming on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, the other stations that they have out there, Skylink, whatever? Why are we eating up what they're saying and not looking at the world through the eyes of God? Why is it that we can't see? They used to talk about years ago, right? The devil is often unseen, right? If we want to go in that lane. And so how is it that we, as people of faith and moral courage, are doing a spiritual exorcism of the systems? Like, how are we owning our power to call out the powers and the principalities, the rulers of darkness in high places that are causing our people to struggle in systems and structures that exist, instead of just telling them, well, it's the enemy that has possessed your child. It's this and that. How about the fact that the enemy is operating in the system, and we need to exercise the system, cleanse it, so that all of our people can flourish and thrive? We need to get up and get the people on our pews. It's not enough for the clergy to be the ones out front all the time. You got to let people speak for themselves, because I hate to tell you, clergy, most of y'all ain't suffering. Most of y'all ain't suffering. You're not taking public transportation. You're driving fancy cars. Now, you might be up with your ears in debt, but that's a choice. but you're not suffering. But the people who are suffering the deepest have to be the ones that share their stories. And it can't be you being the intermediary between them and the public square. You've got to get them in position to be able to speak their truth powerfully about what's going on with them and their families, to be able to speak their truth so we can begin to change the system and encourage others. There are so many of our folk that suffer every single day, and they are embarrassed and shamed because the world tells them that they're poor. They tell them that they're not educated because it's their fault. They're struggling with drugs and alcohol because they're trying to deal with the pain that the world is causing them. And they're embarrassed to come forward. But you know what happens when somebody is no longer ashamed? They find their power and their agency, and they're actually able to tell their story. They begin to find more and more people out there that are in the same situation that they are, that are sick and tired, as Fannie Lou Hamer would say, and want to create change in the world that's around them. And that's what we need the church to do right now, to help empower our people. Don't speak on their behalf, but to help them to be developed, to strengthen them, to understand their story, their narrative, and to help them to get in a position in places where they can own their agency in the world and be able to create the change that we need.
Lord, I feel a preachment coming on. Ephesians 6 says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood,
that's right,
but against principalities, powers, and against rulers of darkness, spiritual wickedness in high places. Right. Therefore, we got to put on the whole armor, right? Wow. Right. That's a Christianized way of thinking about what it might mean to cast our view of what is the struggle wider than who we are as individuals, first off, but that we're lodged in community together, right? And so the struggle, the wrestling, if you will, it has something to do, got to do something with what the struggle is of the folk, not just you individual, right? Not just you individual. I am so I'm troubled, and it leaves me restless many nights, and I toss and turn, and I'm up and about, and I'm praying, I'm thinking, because like Prophet Howard Thurman would say, what is it that this religion, that Jesus is the progenitor of? What does this religion, and what does Jesus have to say to folk who's got their back up against the wall?
Yes,
right?
Sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What? If I got power, how come I can't pull down power to pull down the casting down of these strongholds, right? If I got power, if I got a voice, if I got a witness, it can't just be about, excuse me, I'm sanctified, so I can talk about Pentecostal and speaking in tongues. I can do it, right? But it's got to be, power got to be more than some demonstration of my spiritual authority. If it can't pray off a headache, if it can't get boo-boo out of jail, if it can't do something about the way we got wages going on and the cost of living, if you can't go downtown and say, Mr. Mayor, Miss Mayor, that's wrong, and you need to do something different. If you got, and let me just say this right here for some of our more, excuse me, I'm a little passionate. Let me slow down.
I'm loving it, man. Go for it.
Listen, speak in my Presbyterian voice. Let me speak in my Presbyterian voice. What is it that says we want to shy away from having some power, and having some power so that when you show up down there, at the school board meeting, you can create a ruckus so that they have to hear you and hear what you're talking about. You can show up over there at the State House and do like some of us have done, make such a ruckus they got to come get you. And here's what I love about this day. They arrested us so fast, legislators were coming out and said, man, I was going to get on the line with you. And I said, it's over with. They came and got us right away because they said we was blocking y'all's work. That's what they said we were doing. We were disturbing your work. But if you got some power, that's the power. That's the power of Pentecost, bro. Sis, that's the power of it. Otherwise, go on about your business. That power you talking about is only power to make you feel good. And let me just say, I ain't hating on to feel good, because sometimes you need to feel good, but it can't just be that alone. That's right. It cannot.
Well, I mean, but part of it is like, is God weak? I mean, because by the very definition of the fact that we got all these churches on the corners in hoods, and I didn't call them neighborhoods because they're hoods, that are desolate, falling apart, dilapidated. But there's a whole lot of praying going on, but there's not a whole lot of action going on. And if you want to change that, sometimes you got to pray on your feet, as Frederick Douglass would say, and as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel repeated some century later. Sometimes you got to pray with your feet, right? And march with others downtown. And I'm not just talking about marching for marching's sake. I'm talking about going over and taking a city council meeting until they make a change in their policies, and they're going to make investments in your community or your education system or on your street. And I think that is part of the challenge that we have to have. And let me just say, I do think people think we have a weak God, which is why they're happy just getting a shout on inside the four walls. And don't get me wrong, I like to get my shout on too. And I want the tears to fall, and I want to be praising God, but it's got to manifest itself outside the doors of the church for it to be real. It's not real to me if you can only do it in a certain environment, when the organist hits a certain note and then it breaks out. It's got to break out in City Hall. It's got to break out in state capitol. It's got to break out in our nation's capital, in the court system, and other places, right? Places where decisions are being made. It's got to be able to break out in those places as well. To me, the other piece of it, I mean, I'm not saying it's not real, but I'm saying it's not powerful. People come back from church and say, oh, we had a mighty move of God today, but you coming back to hell. And maybe that's enough for some people to say, okay, well, I got enough to get through another week of hell. I'm trying to say to you, you have the power to get out of hell. You have the power to get out of these condemned situations, these damned situations, these damn situations. And be able to do that, you have to find your agency and partner with others, understand your interest and their interest, and partner them together to be able to create the change that we want to see in the world.
That's right. There's a person watching tonight. I just saw them say something to us in the comments, and I'm reminded of you, my brother down in Florida. I love you and respect you greatly for the work that you do. Who I'm reminded of some of the stuff he's involved in. He goes right into where the deepest and the heaviest of our people do their thing. And I'm talking about hood stuff, right? I'm talking about the underground economy. And he don't go in hating, he go in loving. And so he created a center of love, if you will. And part of it has some faith component, but a whole lot of it is just about delivering, not just service oriented and social services, bringing them in, but also connecting those group of people so that they become a powerful force for change, not just of individuals, but the community, right?
Wait, watch this though. Can I just say something, jump in here real quick? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but check this out. So we get on drug dealers, right? We don't like them. We don't want them in our neighborhood, right? Some of the smartest people in our community.
Yes, sir.
Some of the smartest people we got in our community. Most of the time, they have entrepreneurial spirits and ideas, but they can't get capital to do legitimate businesses, to get the licenses that they need from the state, the government. They don't have the quote unquote educational requirements or the business plan to be able to get funding. So these are guys and women. So we used to say both guys and women that get on the corner. They can't write down who owes them what money. They can't write down the daily compounded interest. They have to have a marketing plan. They have to do all these things. These are some brilliant people that are sitting there on the corner, right? And they have to go to an underground economy because they can't get the things that they need to be able to have legitimate businesses. Now, watch what's happening right now. In the cannabis industry, all the cannabis industry is white folk, right? Because they've been able to go, they don't have a record, they were able to go get the money that they needed, all these other things to be able to open it. But the people who most of the time, I mean, especially folks from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, got weed convictions, can't get into the industry, but have the mind and understand how to run a successful business. They just got busted by the cops. The advantage, a lot of the white folk, they just never got busted. They were doing some of the same stuff, but never got busted. So how do we stop condemning those young folk that are standing on the corner, trying to make money to be able to take care of their families, and say to them, look, I want to help you out. I want to help you get legitimate business. I want to help you there. How do we say to the young woman that's stripping, that's using that as a vehicle to get through college, that we want to be able to help you get set up in legitimate business? And I know some people are like, oh my God, I can't believe he's saying that. The hell with it. This is the reality of the world that we're living in right now. But you've taken a message that says we condemn these people. We condemn them for what they're doing. But we have a former president that slept with a porn star that got elected to be president. And then the evangelicals are around him talking about how wonderful he is and praying for him. And he's God's representative on the earth. But we will condemn our own people. How do we not continue to allow the narrative be that these people are trying to tear us down, and not look at the fact that the educational system that they went to has been failed because it doesn't have the economic resources, that the banking system will give them what they need primarily because they are Black. I mean, I'm actually, my parents are getting ready to move. We're just talking with my mother tonight. And I'm like, who do you have coming in to do the appraisal of the house? Because I'm deeply concerned. They've done studies about this, that when appraisers come in and realize it's a Black person in the house, sometimes it's $100,000, $200,000 difference in the appraisal because Black people live there. Not that it's any different than any other house on the block, but just because Black people live there. And so how do we begin to understand what it is that we're dealing with and stop allowing other people's narratives about us become our own narratives about ourselves, but that we look beyond and begin to think, wait a minute, these young folk are doing math in their head. They're keeping track of their business. They're doing all these other things. The young women, that are stripping, they're making thousands of dollars a night, getting themselves through college and doing. But we don't have alternatives to be able to set them up so that they can be successful someplace else.
Listen, here in Connecticut, one of the things I advocated for, and I took a little heat from it, and I don't care, is that if we're going to legalize cannabis, let me say it the way I said it. If y'all gonna legalize selling weed, all right, then brother and sis that's on the block better have equal access to get the licensures. All right. Otherwise, don't nobody get no license because they running their game is the best game in town. If you want the good stuff, you find the colored people down on the block. Now, and see, I've had occasion. See, I'm one of the preachers that have been out there on the block with them, and I see the kind of cars that roll up, and I see where they go. They don't live in Hartford. They live outside Hartford, but they come in because they know Boo Boo got the good stuff, so they want the good stuff, right? And I said, if y'all gonna turn to the state and let the state get a tap into this coin, right? Then they better have equal access, or we gonna hit the line and shut it down and talk about it so bad until we have to do something different. So they wrote in the legislation, and we have now a system of accountability. And in fact, a couple of they try you on this because they think we're not paying attention. And so we got court cases that's saying y'all have blocked access to brothers and sisters. And you can't use that they've had prior convictions on that. And by the way,
it's an unjust criminal justice system. So of course they have convictions, but come on, it's all working. It's all systemic. Yes. We've got to get all of that. We got to deal with all that.
That's right. And so again, I think our responsibility, what you've named, and I appreciate you, brother, so much around what you are doing and shedding illumination to spaces and places where people want to remain unillumined and unenlightened because it's easier, right? It's easier just to write a check and not have to get themselves both knowledgeable, but also personally involved, right? And so here is the stakes I hear in this season, that the stakes are high. Well, they've been high. You just ain't been paying attention. They've been high. They've been high for a long time. And around our policies, at the end, and my beloved says this all the time. She says, we can talk all we want to about all the lawmaking and the policy commitments that we get, in kind of traditional organizing context. We get these, the legislatures I promise I will, and they never really quite come through with all that. Sure. But beyond that, at the end of those policies and at the end of those promises, are actual people and people's lives, right? And they're impacted and infected, and sometimes derailed and demoralized. And yet, some of the most bravest folk I know are the people who have their backs up against the wall.
That's right.
Who day in, day out, get up in the morning, and as my grandmother would say, when their feet strike Zion, they on their way to do something to make their lives better for not just themselves, but for their families and their communities. Sure. I come from, like you, I come from a line of preachers and community folk and community activists and folk who are on the ground. My mother-in-law worked the polls, and she worked every election from a whole period of time. My auntie and them ran the polls out in our neighborhoods where we grew up in. It was all involved in. My grandmama was at the Y down there at the board trustees with the YWCA. A black YWCA, by the way, in the little town, the little community right next to Ferguson, Kinloch. And so I come from a long line of folk who are both involved in their religious communities, but their religious communities spoke to my grandfather, who was a bishop in the Lord's Church, also ran the old folks' home. My grandmother and him bought a house that was adjacent and back and behind the house. And the story is that they hooked up, that house didn't have no water, right? For the folk. So they hooked up a spigot to the spigot, a water hose, and ran the water hose over to the other house, some kind of way, figured out how to tap into the flow so that they used their water from their own personal house. That water would also be used in the old folks' home. That's the commitment my people made, and that's the lineage I adopted. It's not just adopted; it's in my blood. So right. So it's there and service to not just ourselves, but our communities and the folk in our communities. We done went a little bit past time, and we can talk some more. And I promise you that I would tap into you just for a little bit, and then I'll let you go. Would you tell people how to be in touch with you? How to do, and I want to bring you back because I want to talk more specifically about Faith in Action, and what are the ways us in Connecticut. I know y'all got maybe a group, somebody connected to Faith in Action down in Bridgeport, but you need some.
No, actually, we're not. There's nobody in Connecticut, so the door is open. Connection. So,
what you say?
The door is open. Doors open. So
well, you need to have some kind of affiliation with somebody in Connecticut. There is somebody in Connecticut. Amen. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. And I want to talk next time we talk. I want to talk about your global work because, of course, as you know, that's been very near and dear to my heart, and the work we've been doing over the last 20 years or more, taking folk over across the water to Africa and the Caribbean and Central and South America, because there are those folk that look like us that are in those places too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, folks, a couple different things. So you can find me at changetheDamnWorld.com, which is my personal blog. And I haven't really written in there recently, but there's some older stuff on there, and I'll be back on there shortly. I can also be found on Facebook at Dwayne.Royster. So Facebook.com/Dwayne.Royster, Twitter at or X or whatever you want to call it, at DD Royster, TikTok at Bishop Dwayne Royster, same for Instagram. And you can also find me at faithinaction.com. So that's the international organization I lead right now. So faithinaction.com. And also, I should say, we didn't even talk about the Society for Faith and Justice, which is the ecumenical religious order that we started, which has a carousel of social justice and spiritual discipline, spiritual practice. You can actually find us on Facebook at Society for Faith and Justice to learn more about what we're doing and what's happening right now. Yeah. So, yeah, man, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate this.
Of course, I'm going to have you back soon because we need to talk more, and I want to know what your work what you're doing and what you're connected to as we move out of this summer into the heat of the fall, right?
Yeah,
the heat of the fall. Of course, we have a national election, but we have races all down the ticket. Right. All right. And it ain't got beyond me. We ain't spend no time on what happened in Pennsylvania over the weekend. And the call for a more civil, more calm and peace. And I hear, just in my prophetic ear, I hear no justice, no peace. That's what I hear in my prophetic ear. That's what I hear. Now, I'm not saying nothing. I'm just, I'm just saying that, if we want justice, if you want peace, you got to put some justice on it. And right now we got lots of going on in this world. Listen, y'all, we got to go. I appreciate it very much. Now, if you own the Facebook, share this one, share it. On the Twitters, y'all do what to do with that. And then if you're on the YouTubes, I need you to like and subscribe to More Money at More Money CT or Bishop John Selders. Y'all know how to find me. Thank you again for watching and listening. Whenever you pay attention to us, I appreciate it very much. And we're gonna have other like-minded folk like Dwayne David Royster on these platforms, talking about the stuff that needs to get talked about. All right, peace and justice. How about that? And yes, change the damn world. That's it. Change the damn world. Yes. Do that. All right. God bless.
Thanks.